Al Jazeera Podcasts.
Today, we visit Barcelona during prime tourism season.
There's this sense that this city no longer belongs to you, or is not the city that you grew up in.
Has this city in Spain become a victim of its own success? I'm Malika Bilal, and this is The Take. Barcelona's iconic boulevard, La Rambla, was once the heart of the city, full of local shopping, dining, chatting, living life. But these days, residents say they actively avoid this street, as it's mostly become a sea of international tourists. On July 6th, about 80 social and environmental organizations plan to retake La Rambla. They're calling for a massive demonstration to regulate tourism under the slogan, "Enough." One of our producers here at The Take, Marcos Bartolomé, is lucky enough to call Barcelona home.
Hi, Malika.
Hey, Marcos, it's great to talk to you. So, not only do you live in Barcelona, but I know you also follow the impact of tourism on the city pretty closely, and you've reported on it for a while. Barcelona is one of my favorite spots. I've been there a couple of times. But for those who haven't, paint a picture of your city for us.
Yeah, of course. Let me just come to my balcony to describe it to you. So, Barcelona is unlike any place I've ever lived before. Sometimes it feels even like a living postcard. That's just how beautiful and vibrant it is. But then it can also get overwhelming. Barcelona is the 5th most populous urban area in the EU, and the city itself is in an interesting position. What makes it so beautiful, being kind of trapped between the Mediterranean Sea and the Collserola Mountains, which I can see from here, from my balcony. This also has its drawbacks. The city and the people can only spread so far.
Hemmed in by beautiful geography. So what does that actually mean?
Well, it means that some of the most densely populated square kilometers in Europe are actually located here. So for instance, the area where the Sagrada Familia is, this basilica is Antoni Gaudi's crown jewel, for those who don't know, and also Spain's second most popular destination. Well, that spot has roughly 50,000 inhabitants per square kilometer. That's almost twice as dense as Manhattan, Malika.
And anyone who's been to Manhattan knows that is very crowded.
Right? And we haven't even gotten to the tourist numbers yet. The municipality of Barcelona is home to 1.7 million people. But in 2019, which is the last year with comprehensive data, 28 million people visited the city.
So 1.7 million to 28 million, that is a staggering figure. And as I'm listening to this, as someone who's visited the city, I'm now wondering if I am part of the problem.
Well, so the answer could be yes and no.
Okay.
The organizers of tomorrow's protest are pushing to move away from this tourism-based model we have now. They say that Barcelona can't welcome more tourists. But they aren't targeting tourists themselves as individuals. They are targeting the politicians and also the institutions that enabled the tourism boom in the first place.
So you're there, on your balcony, living in the heart of Barcelona. That tourism that people are protesting against, it must have an impact on you.
Yes, of course. The building next to me, for instance, is all vacation rentals. But it's not just here. There is a housing crisis in the whole city. It's one of the reasons I joined Catalonia's tenants union, one of the organizations calling to protest. And this is how I met Carme Arcarazo. But I'll let her introduce herself.
Yes, so I'm Carme Arcarazo. I'm one of the spokespersons of the Catalonia Tenants Union.
And Carme says tourism keeps her from actually enjoying her own city much of the time.
I'm also a housing and inequalities researcher at the Barcelona Urban Research Institute. and I am from Barcelona, born and raised. Barcelona is basically a city where a lot of us have stopped going to certain places of the city. You know, there's certain parts of Barcelona where you just try to like avoid them. And I think this was like especially like visible during the pandemic and the months after, because a lot of us realized that there were a lot of the places of the city that we would never go, that we would like take them back.
One of those places is La Rambla, she says, where the protest is planned for. Many times, people who want to avoid tourists aren't able to, because these neighborhoods have become major tourist spots. And that's impacted daily life in every way, from housing to public transportation, like the bus system.
The transport is like very, very loaded. You also feel it in like how much you pay for like a coffee or how much you end up paying for a beer. But also a lot of like things have changed. Here, for instance, we usually have dinner around 9, 10 p.m. And before dinner, sometimes you go for a drink. And now you find yourself being stopped, being like, no, sorry, you cannot sit now because now it's like time for like tourists to have dinner. Or like not being able to speak your own language.
Your own language, meaning Catalan, which is one of the co-official languages alongside Spanish. But despite this legal status, she says locals have started to feel out of place as more and more establishments are catering to the tourists.
Well, I feel like people definitely feel like they are being like displaced from the city. There's this like sort of like subjective displacement, if you want to call it that way, like the sense that this city does no longer belongs to you or is not the city that you grew up in.
If that sounds annoying, another Barcelona resident, Elena Parando, says it is.
So for me, tourism is like a mosquito buzzing around your ear when you're trying to sleep. Here in Barcelona, I live a 3-minute walk away from Sagrada Familia. When I'm biking home or going to work, I always have to shout to the tourists, "Bike lane, bike lane." Even when I get off the subway, the escalator is blocked because there are tons of tourists doing this TikTok trend where they place their mobile phone on their stairs and then they record them getting out of the station with the Sagrada Familia in the background.
And she says you can't avoid it. It shows up in every aspect of life. Every aspect.
Like, for instance, I know it may sound a little bit out of place, but you can even feel it in your dating life. When I log into a dating app, I can only find someone for the short term because there's only tourists staying for 3 nights that want me to show them around as if I am some type of guide.
So some locals are developing strategies to reclaim the city they love. Begoña Gómez Ortaiz is a well-known journalist in Barcelona and also a friend of the pod. You might remember her voice from a few of our past episodes. Gatekeeping, she says, is becoming a thing.
There was a very telling story concerning a little local bus line. There's this bus, the number 116. It's more like a big van with a capacity for only 20 passengers, and it's intended to help out the elderly and people with reduced mobility in a neighborhood that is built uphill. It turns out, though, that this tiny little bus is also very helpful to access Park Güell, one of Barcelona's major tourist attractions, a shining example of Antoni Gaudi's architecture that gets almost 4.5 million visitors every year.
And this bus, Begoña says, was basically overrun by tourists. So the neighbors pushed the city to do something.
After much campaigning from local activists, the city council agreed to remove any reference to this bus from Google Maps. This was negotiated with Google itself. And the results were astonishing and also very quick. Almost overnight, the tourists vanished from the 116 bus, and it was left for the locals.
Some of the tourists went to other bus lines, so the issue didn't really go away. But Begoña takes the lessons of bus number 116 pretty seriously.
It proved that hiding information works, albeit temporarily. It also showed that the locals have almost to conspire. They have to gatekeep information and they have to strategize in a million little ways in order to keep living where they live. They have to form an alliance, if you will, against the visitors.
After the break, how tourism has also fueled a whopping housing crisis in Barcelona. However inconvenient the influx of visitors to Barcelona may be, the locals we spoke to said it's not the worst part. Carme, Elena, Begonia, and also Marcos, they all rent their homes in Barcelona. It's become increasingly common.
In 2011, 80% of Spaniards lived in their own houses. Now, only 36% of those under 35 own their own homes. Unable to buy property, millions have been pushed into the rental market.
And the price of rent hasn't stopped soaring.
According to council data, the price of renting in the Catalan capital has risen by 68% in 10 years, while buying and selling has increased by only 38%.
In government surveys, Spaniards are now ranking housing as their second biggest problem. In Catalonia alone, authorities carry out 20 evictions on any given day, most of them owing to rent default. The impact has been severe.
In Barcelona, two sisters aged 64 and 54 have committed suicide just before being evicted from their home.
This, unfortunately, is not the first time that a resident has taken their own life because of housing insecurity. As a speaker of the Catalonia Tenants Union, Carme knows the intimate connection between tourism and the housing crisis Spain is experiencing, specifically when it comes to short-term rentals like Airbnb.
So this has two main effects. The first one, like decrease in supply. There's less apartments available for the people that live in the city. But also there's an increase in price, no? Because this new demand has much higher prices. So it basically like pressures a lot the local market. Since the pandemic, we've seen digital nomads and like sort of like long-term tourists that are like beginning to like establish here for a few months and that can afford prices like housing prices that are like much above residents, and do not have this need of like stability as we do. These temporary or like seasonal contracts, they have increased exponentially.
And it's not the tourists alone causing the price increase. Last year, the Spanish Congress passed a law allowing regional governments to cap the rent on long-term apartments. In March, Catalonia enacted it.
Basically, now we have rent control in Catalonia, which is a very good news. No, after years of like very abusive rent increases, we finally managed to pass a rent control law.
But it doesn't apply to short-term rentals.
This law has a loophole, and it's precisely temporary seasonal contracts. If you do like normal rents, there's a rent cap and there's a price that the state says like, okay, this is the maximum. While with temporary contracts, there's like unlimited rent. So actually, it just promotes speculation.
After the law went into effect, up to 90% of new listings in Barcelona were short-term. And Carme says locals were illicitly pushed into signing these kinds of leases as well.
It's also a figure that is also pushed into local residents. Like, oh, instead of having like a 5-year long contract with a rent cap, I'm gonna rent it to you if you sign a short-term rental, double the price.
So, Malika, I'm recording this from right in front of Casar Solar.
To help us visualize the scale of the problem, Marcos, our producer, took a bike ride to what the tenants union is calling the epicenter of the rental struggle.
This is a beautiful building in Catalan modernist style, right behind me, that dates back to 1913. It has a barbershop, a newsstand, and a bakery.
And the neighborhood has become even more walkable recently, which Marcos says has increased its real estate value.
And in 2021, Lioness, an investment fund, bought the entire property and decided not to renew the tenants' leases. Some of the residents have been living here for decades. Lioness wants them out.
Vasilis is one of those tenants.
Casar Solar has been our home to many of us for decades.
He says, along with his neighbors, they've been resisting eviction for the last 3 years.
Casar Solar has become a symbol of the fight for housing rights in Barcelona, and we refuse to give in to pressure to turn Barcelona into a playground for tourists and wealthy nomads. We're contesting the eviction in court while faithfully continuing to pay our rents as we always have. We refuse to be pushed out, and we won't give up this fight. We deserve to stay in our homes.
With the average rent in the city now higher than the minimum wage, politicians are feeling pressure to act. And Barcelona's mayor, Jaume Collboni, has announced that he intends to ban all tourist rentals by 2028.
Barcelona City Council has announced plans to scrap 10,000 tourist flat licenses in a bid to address the city's acute housing crisis.
You might think the tenants union would be pleased, but Carme says there's more.
So yeah, we have to take it with a pinch of salt. Basically, what we saw is that the mayor of the city announced that by 2028, touristic apartments will be eliminated from the city, which, of course, it's a very good news, but we cannot afford to live 3 more years with the worst housing crisis in recent history. And then the same day that he announced this measure, he announced another measure that he would eliminate or water down the zoning regulation of the city.
It's a regulation tied to affordable housing, Carme says.
So right now, if you're buying an entire apartment and doing refurbishing all the apartments, at least 30% of those have to be affordable. He wants to water down this measure, and the way he found to present it and to have less backlash was to present it next to an apparently good measure.
So now, Carme is going with the tenants union to Madrid, where the Spanish Congress sits.
We just registered a law in the Spanish Congress to eliminate all these fraud around seasonal and temporary contracts. We registered it alongside 5 political parties, but we don't have a total support yet. The Socialist Party mainly is the one that needs to vote in favor, and it will be voted in September.
And this is where this weekend's planned demonstration comes into play, she says.
It will be crucial that the streets are full of people so that the Socialist Party cannot actually look somewhere else, but actually has to look at its citizens and vote for a law that is crucial for the right to housing.
And it's not just Barcelona. There's a push for change in many parts of Spain. The Canary Islands, Mallorca, Malaga. All of these places have witnessed major demonstrations.
Well, I think this demonstration is this demonstration wave actually, because I think we can speak of wave already. It's a backlash on a model. It's not talking about tourists as individuals. It's not talking about a particular city, but it's actually talking about a whole economic model. I think something very interesting about this protest is that they're not only housing groups or for environmental groups. It's a collective of different groups that think that this is a priority. Something that we have to take into account is that the tourism industry has the worst salaries of all. So it's a contestation to this precarious economic model, but also a model that poses a threat to the just ecological transition that we should be undergoing and that threatens residents themselves. So I think what this movement wants to overcome is having an economy based on housing development and tourism and massacring the territory. I think that idea is very powerful, and I think this protest will mark a before and after, definitely, especially in a city like Barcelona.
In Barcelona's history, recent tourism has played a large role, but that wasn't always how things were.
Barcelona has a long history of being an industrial city. Actually, anyone that goes in one of the most up-and-coming neighborhoods, Poblenou, will be able to see this. It's all factories reconverted into offices at the moment. We have a long history, a very strong industrial component, and a very powerful workers' movement. The 8-hour working day was actually achieved firstly in Barcelona.
It was in 1992. When Barcelona hosted the Olympic Games, that everything changed. It was Spain's way to tell the world that the dust of 4 decades of Francisco Franco's fascist dictatorship was well in the past.
I feel like everyone, especially older generations, have a very positive look on the Olympics, no? And it meant like this, like the positioning of Barcelona in the world map. The Olympics meant a massive development of the city.
And it worked. The tourists arrived.
We have seen ever since a high growing number of tourists and a big part of the economy looking outwards instead of looking inwards.
But Carme says these days, Barcelona is experiencing a reckoning.
But just a few years ago, I feel like it's becoming more and more mainstream to actually question whether it was a good idea to hold the Olympic Games. And not only the Olympic Games, but to continue basing the city's economy in these big hosting of events.
The city is also spending millions to host the America's Cup Sailing Regatta. City Hall believes this kind of event is right for Barcelona, but it will bring even more tourists.
Carme says there's another way.
We cannot have an economic model based on speculation, on housing construction. I feel like our economy is very distant from our needs. We need food to eat, we need water, we need energy, we need housing. So I feel like we need to look back and prioritize what is that we need in order to live in a city.
And it's summer in Spain now, a time when a lot of people are engaging in tourism.
Of course, people do have the right to rest and disconnect after being absolutely exhausted, but at the same time, this should not be a reason to expel residents and destroy the planet.
Many people seem to enjoy being a tourist, but few want to bear the brunt of tourism. Carme says it's something people should think about.
And it probably means traveling less. It probably means traveling closer. But I don't think this should be left at an individual's responsibility, but that we actually need to plan collectively how it is that we are gonna shift the model. And that's a conversation that should be upheld.
And that's The Take. This episode was produced by Marcos Bartolomé with Ashish Malhotra, Mohammed Zain Shafi Khan, Manahil Naveed, Veronique Eshaya, Noor Wazwaz, and me, Malika Bilal. It was edited by Amy Walters. Our sound designer is Alex Roldan. Alexandra Locke is The Take's executive producer, and Ney Alvarez is Al Jazeera's head of audio. We'll be back tomorrow.